Christmas. If there's one holiday that is more hypocrite than any, it's Christmas. Now I know what you're thinking. How can Christmas be hypocrite? Well, then my question to you is, how can it not be? But it is one thing to just say it's hypocrite, it's quite another to explain why. And what better way for me to explain it but to use the one story that, in my opinion, embodies everything that makes Christmas hypocrite. I am of course talking about Charles Dickens's Christmas Carol. Yeah, the book's in public domain, so I thought why not just download a copy of that book from the internet. I'm not gonna waste any money on this junk. And before any of you is gonna say anything, if I am to believe my resources, it is quite possible even Dickens himself didn't like this story. Marley was dead, to begin with. There's no doubt whatever about that. Kind of a dark way to start a Christmas story. Maybe this won't be so bad after all. The register of the burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Oh really? Marley's dead? I already forgot since the first time you mentioned it. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. And you are... seriously, who is this narrator? Was this story written for a man to tell in front of an audience rather than a book for people to read? If yes, a book is a book, a stage play is a stage play. If you're gonna use a narrator, I at least expect him to interact with the characters, which this one doesn't. But he was a tight-fisted hand at a grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. In other words, a cynical old fart. How hard can it be to say just that? External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. In other words, neither the cold of winter or the heat of summer affects him. I thought we were supposed to hate the guy, not envy him. A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you! Cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. Bah! Said Scrooge. Humbug!
And a bah humbug to you!
Yeah. For the novice, humbug is the 19th century equivalent to today's bullshit. Merry Christmas! What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? That's a legitimate question. Why do people always say Merry Christmas when they have nothing to be merry about? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying the bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older but at an hour richer. If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Apart from that bit about the pudding and holly, Scrooge has a point. I mean, all Christmas does is give you all the wrong reasons to spend more money than you should. "And this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Of course, if it's Christmas, we gotta help the poor. If it's any other day, they can just rot." Seriously, that's what this implies. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. And I still don't know who you are. Oh well, this is the segment with the Ghost of Christmas Past. Why his full title isn't just Ghost of the Past is anyone's guess, but I'll let that slide for a moment. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him here. Your welfare, said the ghost. Bear that in mind for a moment. The school is not quite deserted, said the ghost. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still. Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. Is this ghost trying to have him relive his traumatizing childhood? Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more, conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? One more shadow, exclaimed the ghost. No, cried Scrooge, no more. I do not wish to see it. Show me no more. Wow, the ghost of the past is an asshole. Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. That they are what they are, do not blame me. Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. I'm sorry, but how am I supposed to buy that this ghost is here for Scrooge's welfare if all he does is mentally torture him? And even if there was some good enough reason to torture Scrooge, the ghost doesn't seem to know any boundaries. Even if I were to disagree with Scrooge about Christmas, I'd still think this ghost is an asshole. Well, with this ghost done and dealt with, here comes the ghost of the present. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. Incense has a bad smell. I don't even want to know what it tastes like. And reading this, it makes me more reluctant to come to any Christmas dinner. Once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humour was restored directly, for they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day. If it were any other day, we can quarrel as much as we like. The hypocrisy level is beyond anything imaginable now, but gets worse when the Cratchit family is introduced. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty. In other words, they can barely afford to live. So, celebrating Christmas could only work in their disadvantage. Especially if you bear in mind that they have a crippled son, Tiny Tim. Speaking of which... Spirit, said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before. Tell me if Tiny Tim will live. I see a vacant seat, replied the ghost, in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. Well, if they didn't waste money on celebrating a redundant holiday, this kid might have been saved. Yeah, I know what this sounds like, but seriously, if Christmas is all about spending time with your family, then aren't you technically already celebrating Christmas every time you are with your family? Give me if I am not justified in what I ask, said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe. But I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. From the foldings of its robe it brought two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Obviously, this church didn't shy away from pedophilia back then either. Spirit, are they yours? Scrooge could say no more. They are men's, said the spirit, looking down upon them. And they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy. Words of wisdom, but kinda pointless to mention here. Last ghost. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. Why didn't he just say ghost of the future? He will later in the story, but why yet to come now? Ghost of the future, he exclaimed. I fear you more than any spectre I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and do it with a thankful heart. Well then, I suppose this ghost has nothing more to offer him, right? Of course I'm not right. This ghost has to be just as much of an asshole as the other two. When did he die? Inquired another. Last night, I believe. Why, what was the matter with him? Asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. I thought he'd never die. God knows, said the first with a yawn. I suppose back in the 19th century people had very low standards, because I can tell from a light year away that they're talking about Scrooge. Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. But only Scrooge can be so slow. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Spirit, he said, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me, let us go. Still, the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head. Seriously, Scrooge already said he'd change his ways. What's the point to keep pestering him? Spirit, he cried, tight clutching at its robe. Hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been, but for this intercourse. Why show me this, if I am past all hope? That's what I'd like to know. I will honor Christmas in my heart, and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. Okay, how is this supposed to work? Is Dickens implying that only through honoring Christmas you can be a good person? If yes, explain this. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. I am as light as a feather. I am as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolboy. I am as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there. Whoop, hello. The guy's gone mad, but he likes Christmas, so that's okay. Right? Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat. That is a legitimate reaction. People don't just change overnight. If I were in this guy's position, I'd react the exact same way. But seriously now, the implications the story is making... Still, from what I read, apparently Dickens needed a quick buck. Or since he's British, he needed a couple of quid real bad. So he wrote this story in a hurry. If he wasn't in such a hurry, it might have been much better. For instance, it would have the three ghosts advise Scrooge on to make his life better. It all just so happens to take place during the holiday. I'd much rather have that than three a-holes brainwashing the guy into insanity. This was D. I'm signing off.